Federal judicial selection. We know that the Constitution allows the President to select federal judges with the advice and consent of the Senate. But what does that mean in practice? Over time, this process has developed into a somewhat complicated dance between the President, the Senate, the nominee, and the public. Let's take a look at how this works. The first step is for the President to wait for a spot on the bench to open up. The most common source of a new seat is the death, retirement, or resignation of a member of one of the federal courts. Sometimes this is because a judge gets appointed to a higher court. Rarely this is because a judge is impeached. But Congress might also authorize additional seats on an existing court. It could create a new court altogether. Finally, this process starts all over again if a previous judicial nomination fails. The next step is for the President to pick a nominee. For this, the President relies heavily on his advisors. They must screen potential nominees for any embarrassing skeletons in the closet. At this point, the President sends the names to the American Bar Association's Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary. This committee provides a rating of the potential nominees. The ratings are well qualified, qualified, and not qualified. Conservative presidents have objected to this process, mostly because the ABA has a tendency to a leftward bias. In fact, President Bush abandoned this step in the process, and the ABA committee had to wait until the name was announced publicly in order to conduct its ratings. President Obama reinstated the ABA's preferred role earlier in the process, but unfortunately for him, he has been rewarded with a high number of not qualified ratings for his judicial nominees. The process is a little different for district court judges. Remember that federal judicial districts do not cross state boundaries, so each district is completely within a single state. There is a tradition of senatorial courtesy in which the President consults with the senators of the state in which the vacancy has occurred. Of course, this tradition only really applies to senators who are of the same political party as the President, and the power of the home state senators has diminished over time. President Carter even insisted that senators set up nominating commissions to provide recommendations. This didn't go over terribly well, and subsequent presidents have abandoned this demand. The last part of this step is the FBI background check. All nominees must go through this process. Assuming that everything goes according to plan, the President announces the name of the nominee publicly. This is also when the senators learn of the nomination. Senators are asked to fill out what is called a blue slip. This blue slip, like the one you see here, simply asks the senator whether he or she approves of the proposed nomination. If a senator fails to turn in a blue slip, the process is on hold. At this point in the process, the nominee also gets a questionnaire to fill out. This questionnaire is quite long and requires the nominee to submit detailed financial records, among other things. If all of the blue slips get turned in, the process moves to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Members of the committee review the nominee's record in detail. At this point, it has become increasingly common for the public and interest groups to become involved, especially when the nominee is for the Supreme Court. The committee then holds hearings about the nominee's record. Well, maybe they do. Sometimes the nominations stall here, especially when a member of the Senate places a hold on the nomination. Often, this is done by a senator from the judge's home state. In fact, our Senator Heller put a hold on Harry Reid's pick for a nomination to the federal district court. He accomplished this by failing to turn in his blue slip. So, if the nominee does get a chance to have a committee hearing, the process moves forward. It is largely a question and answer period where the senators ask questions directed to the nominee, or maybe to the C-SPAN audience, and the nominees do their best to avoid saying anything too controversial. Sometimes the process can be a little less than enjoyable for the nominee. Here is a photo from Justice Alito's confirmation hearing. You can see his wife in the background. Yep, she's crying. Sometimes it gets pretty ugly, but more on that next time. After the hearing, senators have a week in which to submit follow-up questions to the nominee, who then submits written responses. Next, the Judiciary Committee votes to send the nomination to the floor of the Senate for consideration. When the nomination gets to the Senate, it can come with or without a recommendation. The full Senate will then conduct its own debate and hearings. Finally, Barring any filibusters or threats of filibusters, the full Senate will vote on the nomination. A bare majority will take the day. The last step, if a nominee makes it this far, is the swearing-in ceremony. First, the president signs the new justice's oath. Next, they hold a swell little ceremony. Here, the judge takes an oath. Well, actually, it's 2 oaths. They promise to administer justice fairly, and they also promise to defend the Constitution against all enemies. After this, some newly sworn-in justices get a little one-on-one time with the president. Then it's off to get measured for a cool new robe,